Oh my fucking god, merging the human and demon realms. Wasn't that the equivalent of crushing up 2 dimensions and mashing them together? Shen Qingqiu didn't find this idea unbelievable. In fact, he found it the exact opposite. He was certain that, as long as one had Qingmo's sword in hand, achieving this ambition, which sounded like some absurd feat of the imagination, was absolutely possible, because he had evidence from the original work. Merging the 2 realms was a lunatic move Luo Binghe had pulled to fully unite the demon realm and cultivation world when the original work neared its conclusion. Before, Shen Qingqiu had always thought that the original work's, quote, Luo Binghe, was the one he knew best. But, thinking about it now, he realized that this character seemed very distant to him, almost like a stranger. That, quote, Luo Binghe, cared not a single bit for the destructive consequences of such actions. His reason for doing it was that the separation of the realms made them difficult to govern, and resources were unevenly distributed. All his demon wives and lackeys kept blathering on about this, which annoyed him, so he decided to simply up and integrate them to make everything easier to manage. "This is the present you want to give?" Shen Qingqiu asked. "That's quite a lot of malicious intent." Tian Langjun stroked his chin. "I don't mean it as such," he said in a gentlemanly tone. "I love the human realm very much, and enabling closer relations between the 2 races has always been my wish." Shen Qingqiu raised an eyebrow. Has Tian Langjun really never thought about it, or does he just not care? Demons can adjust to the human realm, but how many humans outside of the cultivation world could grow accustomed to demons? Or, to put it another way, he placed emphasis on select words in the following question. Even if you love humans, can you guarantee that all the demons will love them as well? The races have been separated since ancient times, and countless conflicts still arise between them. If you merge the realms without proper consideration, you shouldn't dream of having a single day of peace. Peak Lord Shen is undeniably someone of the 4 major sects. You all sing the same song," Tian Langjun said helplessly. "This is a bit abrupt, but it wasn't my original intent either. Having experienced one loss, I can only forge ahead, merging the realms first and taking care of the rest later. We'll take it slow, no matter how unaccustomed you may be to an unchangeable truth when first faced with it. You adjust in the end." Quote, "All bosses are tunies," unquote. This really did seem to be a law of nature. But Tian Langjun's situation was rather special. Perhaps he had been an innocent and idealistic tunie before, who'd always thought he could save the world and bring peace and love to the 2 races. After being trapped under Bailu Mountain for so long, he had become a bitter and resentful tunie. So, a gargantuan consequence like this would only be, quote, "a bit abrupt," unquote, in his words. The last part even sounded like violation logic. If you violate a person often enough, they'll cooperate eventually. So do it first and think about the rest later. Shen Qingqiu couldn't resist asking, "So, you and Su Xiyan, was that merely to promote closer relations between the races?" When Tian Langjun suddenly heard this name, that smile, which had spread across his face like liquid ink, froze. He turned his head, and Shen Qingqiu could only hear him let out a quiet sigh. Xiyan, she was truly... Truly what? Shen Qingqiu pondered the subtleties in Tianlangjun's tone. Agreeable and gentle, kind and pure, my angel? Cold and heartless, Tianlangjun continued. I loved her for that. Shen Qingqiu was going to split his sides, laughing. But either way, she's already dead. So he didn't miss her at all? A demon's love would probably always be rather meager. Shen Qingqiu was silent for a moment. What exactly do you think of Luo Binghe? Tianlangjun looked at him. I feel sorry for him? Shen Qingqiu put on an unaffected smile, but had no way to respond. Though Luo Binghe had never said a word about it before, Shen Qingqiu knew that he harbored some fantasies about his birth parents. He only knew that he had been born of a woman from a renowned sect and a noble of a heavenly demon blood, but he didn't know who exactly his parents were, or their names. In fact, he'd always secretly fantasized about whether his parents might still be alive, and how well they'd treat him, and how they'd never let him suffer the Midas slight. If Luo Binghe learned his birth father was this sort of person, with this kind of attitude, that this father might even look down on him because of his half-human parentage, those fantasies would become truly laughable. Once night fell, this grand procession, with dust and sand billowing all around them, came to a stop on a lush plain. There they made camp, though the only ones who actually needed to camp were the few humanoid demons. Their beastly kin could just sleep under the open skies, in dirt burrows, in the trees, in the grass, wherever they could find. Shen Qingqiu's bed was inside a wide and comfortable white tent. Its exterior was simple, but the interior was fully stocked. Zhu Zilang personally made all the arrangements before bringing him inside. Once the demon girl who had accompanied him this whole time left, Shen Qingqiu eagerly lay down on the bed, closed his eyes, and waited for dreams to descend upon him. An unknown amount of time later, he suddenly noticed the light shifting before his closed lids. Shen Qingqiu opened his eyes to see Luo Binghe kneeling in front of his bed. He only got half a sentence out of his mouth. Luo Binghe, listen to me. There's something very important. Before Luo Binghe threw himself at him, he landed right on top of Shen Qingqiu, shoving him back onto the bed, while something soft covered his mouth so entirely he couldn't make even a single muffled sound. He could only lie there and glare, his face turning red with rage. Luo Binghe had no restraint. He deepened the kiss further and further until he was gnawing at Shen Qingqiu like a small biting animal. Shen Qingqiu finally managed to catch his breath. Luo Binghe, kneel! Luo Binghe actually knelt with a sweep of his hem. Do you know why I told you to kneel? Luo Binghe kept his back ramrod straight and said, As a disciple, I violated Shizun. Who's talking about that? This master will settle that debt with you later. Tianlangjun told you to hand over Xingmo sword, and you really just handed it over? I don't remember teaching you to be such a... He couldn't quite finish his sentence, but continued in his mind. To be such a pure and sweet little fool. I had no choice, Luo Binghe said, and it was nothing major. Why wouldn't I hand it over? Bruh! What do you mean by nothing major? That's a golden finger no one else could have, even if they begged and cried. Reciting to himself that, quote, not even a mountain of gold can withstand a spendthrift, unquote, Shen Qingqiu said, Did you not consider why he wanted Xingmo's sword? What threat the northern and southern borders, as well as Changqiu Mountain and Huanhua Palace, would suffer? Is Shizun angry that I gave Xingmo to him because he was afraid it would endanger all these places? Luo Binghe asked. Or only because it would endanger Changqiu Mountain? What was he saying? This was just like those girls who continually pestered their men saying things like, "Do you love me? Which do you love more, me or your career?" Shen Qingqiu wanted to keep hashing out the considerations of relationship value with Luo Binghe and get back to business, but the words caught in his throat. The light of the demonic foot soldiers' torches lit the fabric of the tent from outside, and he heard the cries of beasts and calls of purposefully lowered voices. No matter how he looked at it, this didn't seem like the world within a dream. So no matter how he looked at it, Luo Binghe was standing right there in his tent, and not in the dream realm. He had shown up in his real body. He didn't have Xingmo's sword to serve as an anywhere door, and reaching here from the northern border required traveling 1,000 kilometers at minimum. Shen Qingqiu really wanted to slap Luo Binghe upside the head, but when he considered this long journey, he had to think before doing anything to him. Luo Binghe was creeping closer again, like a snake slithering up the stick you hit it with. One of his legs was already on the edge of the bed, which made Shen Qingqiu nearly spit blood, but he had to assume a Shizun's authority. Luo Binghe, aren't you too sure of yourself? Thinking you're so skilled and courageous that you deliver yourself up all alone? At least 1/5 of the southern demons have joined this army, not to mention 2 seniors of your bloodline who are most difficult to handle. If you're discovered, it will only mean your death. Shizun, I can't steal you back outright. I'm afraid they'd activate the blood mites in your body. But you can't expect me to just sit and wait, Luo Binghe said. Don't scold me anymore, Shizun. I really can't resist. Shen Qingqiu kept pushing Luo Binghe's head away, doing all that he can to maintain a proper face. Did you alert anyone when you infiltrated the camp? Impossible, said Luo Binghe. If I wanted to be stealthy, not a soul will see me. There's only one thing I'd need to worry about. Before he could say exactly what that was, a light cough sounded from outside the tent, and they heard Zhu Zilang's voice. Immortal Master Shen, have you retired? As soon as Luo Binghe heard this voice, murderous intent flared in his eyes, and he shot an ice-cold glare in that direction. Shen Qingqiu hurriedly shoved him down and gave him a severe look, ordering him not to do anything rash. For some reason, even though Luo Binghe had been glared at, a faint blush rose on his cheeks. Shen Qingqiu shuddered at the sight. Demonic troops were patrolling outside, while inside there was nowhere to hide, so, as a last resort, Shen Qingqiu lifted the blankets on his bed, and Luo Binghe cheerfully slid beneath them. Outside, Zhu Zilang wondered to himself, is he asleep this early? Everything was silent outside for a while, and Shen Qingqiu almost thought Zhu Zilang had left. He was about to let out a sigh of relief when Zhu Zilang continued. Then this humble one will be disturbing your rest. Ah! So you're coming in, whether I'm asleep or not? Then why the hell did you even ask? Luo Binghe poked his head out and asked suspiciously, What is this snake coming to do while Shizun's asleep? Just hide properly, you little rascal, Shen Qingqiu shoved Luo Binghe's head back under the blanket and hopped off the bed. Don't come in! Zhu Zilang indeed didn't come in. So, you haven't retired? He asked, confused. Immortal Master Shen, why didn't you answer just now? I was tired, and I didn't want to talk. Xi Zhilang, you can go. Zhu Zilang was perplexed. Didn't we agree on this earlier today? Damn it. Indeed, earlier he had agreed to let Zhu Zilang come back in the evening to burn off the rest of the ties that bind. Luo Binghe popped his head out again and quietly demanded, Agreed on what? Shen Qingqiu had just finished piling a second set of blankets on top of Luo Binghe and lowering the bed curtains when Zhu Zilang stepped into the tent. He was holding that little metal furnace, gaze averted to the side. Immortal Master Shen, I beg your pardon for intruding so late at night, but further complications will arise if the ties that bind are not completely extracted. It would be too suspicious to drive him out after letting him in. Plus, Zhu Zilang was strangely hesitant to look at Shen Qingqiu too much either way, so he would just have to be careful. Shen Qingqiu stood in the front of the bed curtains with a faint smile. I understand. Thank you for your trouble, he said. I'm merely doing my duty, Zhu Zilang said politely. Immortal Master Shen, why don't you sit on the bed? He even took a step in that direction, but Shen Qingqiu slid in front of him and grabbed his arm, turning him around in a half circle. Only when Zhu Zilang had his back toward the bed curtains did Shen Qingqiu continue. Not on the bed. Right here. Dragged by the arm, Zhu Zilang had been inexplicably forced to about face, but he was hesitant to ask why. He took it as a momentary whim and asked, good-naturedly, While standing? While standing, Shen Qingqiu said resolutely. Immortal Master Shen will be able to bear it? Behind him, Luo Binghe threw off the blankets, fury written across his face. Shen Qingqiu remained impassive. I've grown used to it. Zhu Zilang nodded and turned to set the furnace on the table. Shen Qingqiu took this opportunity to send a palm strike at Luo Binghe across the space between them, knocking him back into the blankets and covering him back up at top speed. By the time Zhu Zilang turned around, both were in their proper places and nothing was amiss. Zhu Zilang retrieved a red-hot coal. Immortal Master Shen, please remove your outer robe. Shen Qingqiu looked down and began to very slowly untie his sash. He didn't dare to do it fast. If he really took it off, Luo Binghe would probably break both the bed and the other person in the room. His hands creaked with agonizing slowness, and after waiting for forever, Zhu Zilang finally couldn't help himself from taking a peek. Immortal Master Shen, is it too difficult with your finger's condition? Do you need this humble one's assistance? Seeing Zhu Zilang begin to look up, Shen Qingqiu yanked at his lapels and his outer robe slid right off his shoulders. Having yanked it off like that, his robe fell to his feet. Then he shoved his arm under Zhu Zilang's nose, and the latter no longer had the attention to spare for anything else as he began examining it with care. After his tireless efforts to remove the ties that bind for a whole day, they finally showed signs of receding. The right half of Shen Qingqiu's chest and his right arm were no longer as lushly foliated as they had been when he had first awoken, and only a few scattered little buds remained. Luo Binghe silently sent out a palm strike, and a wave of black qi rushed straight at Zhuge Zilang's back. Shen Qingqiu waved his arm and sent the coal in Zhuge Zilang's hand flying with a smack. The coal tumbled outside the tent, and having been slapped for no reason, Zhuge Zilang was greatly perplexed. "My hand slipped," Shen Qingqiu said apologetically. Zhuge Zilang accepted this explanation without jumping a single mental hurdle and went outside to pick it up. He walked around for a time outside, confused. Where did it roll off to? With a tap of his foot, Shen Qingqiu leapt into the bed. "Shizun, what sort of days have you lived while under their thumb?" Luo Binghe whispered. "What sort of days? Idle ones spent lazing around doing nothing pretty much." "Don't mess around," Shen Qingqiu whispered back. Then, with a smooth motion, he shoved Luo Binghe back under the blankets. Luo Binghe was sullen and utterly unwilling to just let things go on like this. He didn't think he'd be absolutely defenseless against Tianlangjun, but as long as the blood mites in his Shizun's body were not removed, he had to restrain himself. With a crook of his finger, the outer robe on the floor flew into his hand, and he draped it over Shen Qingqiu's shoulders. "Put your clothes on," he whispered. Outside, a minor demon passing by the tent greeted Zhuge Zilang. "You came at just the right time. Help me find something." His bearing and tone were entirely different from how he spoke to Tianlangjun and Shen Qingqiu, and it truly matched his status as a big-shot general. "Put what on?" Shen Qingqiu said. "I was always going to take it off." Luo Binghe was enraged. "Shizun, why do you insist on taking off your clothes for him to see?" He shoved Luo Binghe down again and again, but still failed to make him behave, and Zhuge Zilang suddenly returned while Shen Qingqiu was still struggling. Not having the time to return to his original spot, Shen Qingqiu whirled around and threw himself down, getting into a seated position in the center of the bed. "Immortal Master Shen, didn't you just say you didn't want to do it on the bed?" Zhuge Zilang asked. Shen Qingqiu laughed. "Ha ha! Oh, really? Did I say that?" In his haste to hide Luo Binghe, he'd accidentally sat on top of him, but that had worked out. Luo Binghe was finally docile and didn't move. Zhuge Zilang walked up to the bed, casually remarked, "Isn't Immortal Master Shen warm?" Shen Qingqiu wanted only to get this over with as quickly as possible. He grabbed Zhuge Zilang's arm and pressed the red-hot coal to his chest. Amidst the hissing sound of burning, he said calmly, "It's not too warm." "Then Immortal Master Shen, doesn't it hurt?" "It doesn't hurt." Pleased, Zhuge Zilang said, "Immortal Master Shen was always so reluctant every time before, yet tonight he's finally taken the initiative for once. This is how it should have been." Shen Qingqiu wasn't listening at all carefully to what he was saying, only thinking to finish this as fast as possible so he could shoo Zhuge Zilang out as fast as possible. He asked, "Is that enough?" Zhuge Zilang took the coal away. "It's enough."